Folks, we're in for another treat. We're updating you on some technology initiatives. Of course, who's leading the charge? Not surprising, but Pavan, who's with me. Pavan, thank you so much for joining me on this special day to talk about something that's really an exciting development.
Oh, yes. This is what an incredible time. And I'm so excited to have Steve Kinard on this podcast. He was so gracious, a really busy guy, gracious to accept this invitation.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about Steve is that he is Hispanic and just very proud of his Latin culture and is very deeply involved in the community in Texas. He ran for
Another
Congress.
Texan, good. Another Texan. I'm down in Marble Falls, Steve, so you know where I'm at.
Oh, good. We're nearby. I'm in the Dallas area.
Okay, good. I have a daughter up there. Daughter, granddaughter, and son-in-law. All right.
Yeah. He wanted to give back to his community, so he ran for local state legislator, and he just lost by a whisker.
Oh,
George Soros outspent him, but even then he lost by a whisker. He truly represents everything great about America, everything great about immigrating and building.
Awesome. Love those stories.
And multiculturalism, just the whole thing, how to do it right. And so now he is running AI Innovation Connect.
Yeah, now I want to understand that. But first of all, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm really interested in learning how this started. Pavan, I think you were the inspiration for this starting, and then want to hear the story about how the two of you connected. Pavan, you first.
Okay, basically, we were watching, Steve and I and Lee, we were watching what was happening in the AI world. And we're just seeing the big monopolies trying to take over and control the legislative landscape.
Yeah.
Google's own engineers issued a paper a couple of years ago, I think in 2021, 2022, that said, literally the title of the paper was, "We have no moat." Okay.
We have no moat, as in a moat around a castle.
Yes, exactly. And that's a common term used in the tech industry, which basically says the value of your technology is only as good as your moat, meaning what separates other people from jumping into it. Okay. Because AI has been around for so long and the algorithms are in the public domain, and all of the work that was done, the foundational science behind ChatGPT, behind Google's Gemini and all these things was all put in the public domain. There's no way for AI companies, it's really hard for AI companies to differentiate themselves. So they're all fighting for the same market, and they're all building basically the same model, going down, narrowing to the same point. So the only way that I see that they can do it, and which is the path that I've seen them take, is by implementing regulations so they can create a duopoly or triopoly of a few AI companies that makes it very difficult for smaller startups, smaller innovators, and quite frankly, for businesses in general, to take full advantage of AI, to leverage it, so that their legacy business can now become an AI business, right? So if you can stifle legacy businesses from becoming AI businesses by using the technology through regulation, then the handful of companies that do control AI, they will basically not just run AI, they'll run everything. And that's a scary thought. That
really gets into the heart of this interview, because what has just transpired is you have established a regulatory construct that protects from the monopolies, duopolies, having control of this. Am I correct?
That is correct. So going back to your question of how we met, so I've been involved with blockchain and the crypto world for a while. And I met Lee at the Texas Blockchain Conference, the North American Blockchain Summit.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, and Lee and Steve are close, and they work together. And so the three of us sat around and said, we need to fix this AI problem. We need to make sure AI doesn't go the way of social media, where they're controlling, where a few companies are controlling everything, and they're also controlling who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak. What people don't realize is that AI is the cornerstone of free speech now. It's no longer social media. Social media was whatever control it had over your speech, it's a baby compared to what AI has control over. Right. So this is really a First Amendment free speech issue. And it's also a free commerce issue by keeping it open and a scalable and free enterprise model and keeping America an open economy as opposed to an oligarchy of a few powerful corporations.
It's interesting to hear this whole concept develop, and that the fact that you had the foresight to recognize this was necessary. So, Steve, how did the two of you connect? And tell us from your side. And then I can't wait to get into what you have just accomplished.
Yeah, I thank Pavan for the kind introduction, and I think I'll expand on that a little bit because it helps to set the landscape. I'm an energy professional by background, worked in oil and gas for years, was an entrepreneur, part of starting an oil and gas company, selling an oil and gas company, working in banking. And it was through that sort of energy lens that I first heard about high performance computing, and at that time, really Bitcoin mining, being used in the oil field to monetize stranded and wasted energy resources. And it's a funny story because at that time, I would have told anybody willing to listen, I would say, I don't really know anything about Bitcoin, but I do know that there's a lot of stranded and wasted energy. And if we can monetize that, then I'm very interested in that. And so it pulled me down the proverbial rabbit hole. But what I found as I went down that path is that there was really a philosophical alignment with this burgeoning technology of Bitcoin and really my outlook on society more broadly, which is just a belief in private property rights and innovation and decentralization and not having an overly onerous and intrusive government. And I saw those values reflected in Bitcoin, and I just got fascinated by it. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Lee Bratcher, who was on the board of AI Innovation Association, along with Pavan. And we happened to live about a mile apart and just got along. And one thing led to another. We became friends.
About a mile apart?
Maybe it's 2 miles, but we're very close.
What you mean here? Close. It's close proximity. Yes, I get it. I just want to make sure it was distinguished between you and Pavan.
Oh yeah, no, Pavan's that's
off in paradise. Yeah,
you gotta get on an airplane to get to Pavan. But Lee and I are nearby and similar age kids and all that kind of stuff. But really, I started to see we had a shared vision, and I give Lee the credit for starting the Texas Blockchain Council, building it into one of the largest industry associations in that space. And so I decided, look, I'm going to leave the comfortable corporate world and be a part of building that vision, really with an eye on bringing in more corporate partnerships, which is what we did at Texas Blockchain Council with the big event where we met Pavan. We had a couple of major summits that we hosted in Texas through that council, where we really distinguished ourselves by having very high level people within the political world. I had the opportunity to interview Senator Ted Cruz on stage. We had Robert Kennedy, we had Vivek Ramaswamy, and the list goes on. But in addition to just holding events with those people, we distinguished ourselves by being action oriented. And if I can just say it bluntly, by actually getting stuff done. By actually being a part of...
In a political world, that is so difficult to imagine something getting done, because after everything's said and done, a lot is said and not much is done.
There's a lot of talk, but it's easy to post on social media. It's a different thing to get things done. And I always appreciated that about the Texas Blockchain Council. I was part there of...
What year did the Texas Blockchain Council start, approximately?
Probably 2020. That would be a Lee Bratcher. I started in 2021, and it had been around a little bit before that. And then it ramped up enormously through the adoption of Bitcoin in those couple of years, particularly during kind of that COVID time frame. And so that ethos was what Lee and I had, is a pro-innovation, pro-decentralization ethos, and a focus on really actually materially impacting legislative outcomes that affect those values. And that was the vision that we saw with Pavan. And again, I give him the credit for really realizing that we need that kind of association, that kind of voice within the AI world. And at that time, I was increasing my political involvement because I was running for state representative and met a lot of people through that and didn't quite get the outcome that we wanted, but just had a lot of momentum and sense of purpose, I would say, to continue to be involved in the political process. And really saw the AI, and I think this is a quote that I'll credit Pavan with, AI is not optional. It's something where it has such a big impact on really every facet of business and frankly life, that it's being embedded in every phone and every car and everywhere you go. I think that can be a good thing. I maintain a position.
There's also, without any guardrails, there are risk factors.
There you go. With anything that's disruptive in a major transition, there are going to be risks. So that's what got me excited. I said, okay, let's launch the AI Innovation Association. Let's be a place for like-minded people to band together to build a professional network and to advance that kind of agenda. And if I can give a little bit of background as we lead up to our most recent efforts, it wasn't that long ago that almost entirely the political discussion as it pertained to AI was around safety. Everything was safety in the name of ethics. Those two went together.
Right.
If you don't focus on only safety, then you are unethical. Maybe nobody said that out loud, but it was inferred. And it became something of a kind of bludgeoning tool, I think, that was being misappropriated to create a scenario where only a few companies were ever going to be able to develop AI at scale, because you'd have a constant permitting regime centralized at the government level. And we saw that with some of the executive orders a couple of years ago, and maybe most problematically in a law in California that passed out of the legislature that basically would have had a central licensing regime where there would be certain things that you just flat out never could do and would have to apply to the government and prove to them that nothing you're doing could be misappropriated, which is almost an impossible threshold. And I will give credit to Governor Gavin Newsom, not a person I often agree with, but I will give him credit that he vetoed that bill because the community rose up and said, this is a terrible idea. And California is a leading technological hub, and that's great for America, and we should applaud that. But that sort of approach would have been very stifling to innovation. So this was fairly recently, maybe a year and a half ago.
Interesting.
And so fast forward, obviously there was a major inflection point with the most recent election last November, and there's been a material change in tone. And so
That's
you had, I think, a watershed speech that Vice President J.D. Vance gave in Europe, where he really said quite bluntly, the way to win the AI economy of the future is not through a myopic focus on safety. Safety is a part of it, but you're not going to win by being the most safe. And we need to win by building, by innovating, and by accelerating adoption.
So good.
And it really flipped the script, I think, and in a good way. And the question for us collectively is, what does that look like? I think we have a tremendous opportunity in the state of Texas with some of the bills making their way through the legislature, because they are on the precipice of being passed into law. And I'll touch on that in a second. But DC tends to move pretty slow in terms of the legislative process. And I think that's where a state like Texas can serve as something as like a countermeasure to California, if you will, to cast a different vision of what this can look like.
When you say a different vision, go ahead, Pavan, you had something you were going to interject. I don't want to lose that moment.
I'm glad you brought up Europe, because 2 years ago, they passed these draconian rules on AI safety. And take a look at them now. There's nothing happening in Europe as far as AI. There's no
AI innovation, you mean?
There's no private industry. It's dark. And they're so proud of the rules they passed. Look how cool we are. We're way ahead of this. No, actually, they just
actually, when we have protectionism to this level, which, while it maybe sound good on the surface, it has a tendency to move everyone to the center of the field rather than being able to go out there and play to the full bandwidth of what is potential.
Yeah, Europe's been completely strangled, and their companies are out of AI. So, if anything, right, I wouldn't be surprised if American AI giants were behind those rules.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. But going on, as you were explaining, Steve, get into where you were about to go with talking about how significant what you've just developed or agreed to or had agreed to here in Texas is so significant to this initiative.
Yeah, so I think it's great to have a show like this where maybe we can spend a little time to dig in a little bit so that people can appreciate what's going on and why I think it has the potential to have a big impact. There's a bill in the state of Texas, Senate Bill 1964, and that bill has passed out of the Senate unanimously, and I want to highlight that because it's really great to have broad bipartisan support and broad bipartisan recognition that this is an important issue. And so it's moved into the House of Representatives and was being heard in the Texas Doge Committee last week, which a personal goal of mine was to be able to testify in the Texas Doge Committee, because what Texan wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah.
And so it's the Delivery of Government Efficiency Committee, Doge, and I was honored to have that opportunity to testify there in support of the bill. And there's a broad recognition, as I said, that this is an important issue. In fact, one of the representatives on that committee said this may be the most important bill that we hear as a DOGE committee, because what's the way we're going to make government more efficient? AI.
Yeah.
So the issue there is less one of, is there a emerging consensus? I think that there is. It's more, there's only a few weeks left in the legislature, and there's a lot of other bills out there. And so we're really hoping to shine a light on this so that hopefully it can move ahead and get the vote on the floor of the House of Representatives that it needs to then make its way to the governor's desk. And so listeners may be saying, okay, but what is it? And why should we support it? So let me maybe spend a minute to expand on the 2-minute testimony that I provided in committee. And we can share a link to that. That's a public committee hearing that I would encourage anyone there to hear the testimony that I gave as president of the AI Innovation Association. But let me dig in a little bit of why I think this bill is a good kind of framework for the country to look at. First, the focus of the bill is on the public sector. That's important because I think that the public sector, government agencies, and local governments can be a good area to establish and promote best practices, to interact with a lot of private sector vendors, but to not give control of the government over the entire private sector. I think we want to move very carefully when you're talking about passing a law or giving authority to some committee that will impose regulations on the private sector broadly, because that can become much more restrictive. There is a bill in Texas on AI that's more oriented to the private sector. That is House Bill 149, which we support as well because it's very tailored. And
how does that differ from 1964?
So the focus of 1964 is its provisions would really mandate key things that would need to be done by government agencies.
Okay.
And so now, obviously, vendors that are selling to government agencies are going to fall within that framework. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an innovator, you can do that in the state of Texas. And I think you should be able to. We're a pro-innovation state. But the focus of the bill is on government agencies. And I think that's a really important way to lead on some of these ethical considerations without creating the sort of regime that Pavan was talking about in Europe, where you just bring every single company under this kind of giant umbrella, and it just gums up all of the works of an innovative economy.
Innovation too, just the whole concept of what we're trying to develop here. That's really interesting. At this point, then, now bring us forward to what you were able to accomplish here. Pavan was so excited about it. He shared it with me on Friday. I go, we got to record this. We got to get this out.
So our engagement has been really focused on what I think is a differentiator for this bill, which is a requirement for an AI code of ethics. It puts that under the control of the Texas Department of Information Services, which is in turn under the authority of the governor. But we believe creates a real framework for a state like Texas and then the United States broadly to start to establish what do we mean in terms of complying and being ethical, because there was a real risk in other kinds of approaches of empowering bureaucrats and committees to, in the name of ethics, enforce all kinds of restrictions that are really not legal, or at least of dubious legal authority. And what I'd like to do for a minute is read from the bill itself, which in turn I had testified in support of, because it'll give you some of the concrete
please do.
stipulations of that. And I think that's important for people to understand. The bill says, I'll just read from it, the Department of Information Resources, by rule shall establish an artificial intelligence system code of ethics for use by state agencies and local governments that procure, develop, deploy, or use artificial intelligence systems. At a minimum, and I'll highlight that at a minimum because we think there'll be a broader kind of engagement process here to build out this code of ethics over time. And we as AI Innovation Association plan to be very involved in that. We think it's a positive thing. So it says, at a minimum, the Artificial Intelligence System Code of Ethics must include guidance for the deployment and use of artificial intelligence systems and heightened scrutiny artificial intelligence systems that aligns with the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So let me pause for a second there because I think this is important as well. That National Institute of Standards and Technology published that a few years ago, this risk management framework. So this discussion has been ongoing. And I want to highlight that it's not as if this framework that I'm going to lay out in a second here kind of came out of nowhere. No, quite the opposite. There's been a lot of dialogue already at the federal level with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and also through a stakeholder engagement process in Texas, which we ourselves have been involved in. And so I think that this is really more advanced maybe than most people understand. So it lists a couple of those of what the guidance must address. Number 1, human oversight and control. Number 2, fairness and accuracy. Number 3, transparency, including consumer disclosures. Number 4, data privacy and security. Number 5, public and internal redress, including accountability and liability. And number 6, the frequency of evaluations and documentation of improvements. So those are these 6 core items that form sort of the minimum basis for this code of ethics. And then through a public process, that will be expanded to touch on other items. And I'll highlight other important considerations for a lot of us we're in the private sector. We're maybe not direct employees of government agencies. And that is, number 1, there is a program called the Sandbox program here, which is a way, if you're developing something that's innovative and you feel for some reason or another that maybe it's in a gray area or something in this bill isn't clear enough, you can opt into that Sandbox program, work collaboratively with a council that's established by this bill, and advance that research so that what we want to prevent is people saying, this bill is too onerous and I can't create my business.
And then not advance innovation. Yeah.
Right. So you give that Sandbox program here.
Yeah.
And the bill I mentioned before that's private sector oriented, HB 149, also has a sandbox. So these two concepts are tied in no matter what you're doing in the state of Texas. And I think we should adopt this as the United States. You always have some relief if you just participate proactively and collaboratively. And I think that's a really welcome development, as opposed to vague regulations just passing, and then you've got some committee you have to go to try to start jumping through hoops. Nobody wants that. So this has that Sandbox program. So if anything I say seems like horribly onerous or your business just can't comply with it, well, then you have an area where you can seek that kind of opportunity to navigate that and continue to build a business. Now, not everyone's going to be approved. I think if you come and say you want to use AI to advance gain of function research for bat coronaviruses, I don't think the state of Texas is going to approve that. So maybe don't waste your time if that's your proposal. But most reasonable businesses interested in developing products and services with AI, I think you're going to have a really meaningful way to advance that under this kind of framework. The second thing I'll highlight, David, is the enforcement authority in these frameworks is given to the Attorney General. I think that's important because what you don't want is a bill passing and every lawyer looking for a way to use it to start suing people.
Exactly right.
Which has been done that kind of litigious gumming up of the innovation economy. We've seen that play out time and time again.
Right.
And these are focused on enforcement through a public elected figure, the Attorney General, with a public process, which is made very clear here, public and internal redress, including accountability and liability. And so I really want to highlight that because I do think people can often misunderstand and say, we're going to pass this bill and you just won't be able to do anything because you'll be sued out of business. And I don't think that's what's going to happen with this. So this is really exciting because this is passed out of the Senate unanimously. It's been heard in the DOJ committee with our testimony. And now we're on the precipice of passing this into law and having something where we can remove a lot of this uncertainty that people feel like, how can I invest and develop an AI if some government bureaucrat somewhere can shut my business down? And this will clarify that and allow us, I think, to accelerate adoption and would be a huge win for America.
Yeah.
So Steve, you mean Texas, unlike California, is not owned by the plaintiffs bar?
That's right. Now, like any other state, there's a huge lobby. Believe me, there's a big lobby for that kind of stuff. But you're right. This bill is informed by the experience of prior bills that can be misappropriated for those kinds of all the lawyers groups that kind of look for ways to generate business with all kinds of lawsuits.
So Pavan, you were excited about Texas adopting, am I correct, a standard or a code of conduct standard? Is that correct, Pavan?
Yeah, so this bill makes paves the way for a code of ethics.
Code of ethics. Okay.
The bill specifically doesn't list out the code of ethics. It just establishes that which department is it, Steve, that will do it?
Department of Information Resources.
Yeah, there we go. So the Department of Information within Texas will then be commissioned to establish an AI code of ethics. And the AI Innovation Association, our association, has already published a code of ethics, which is almost entirely in line with the thought process of the legislature currently.
Yeah. So we've been developing that framework that aligns with what this bill is doing because we think it makes a lot of sense, but there's more to build on top of that. And I think that's really the useful role that an association can have in this kind of process.
Yeah. Could you, Steve, quickly summarize the code of ethics? What are the main points?
Yeah. And the code of ethics that we've been building out builds on the same points that I just read from the bill itself. And I can reiterate those. And then we have some other areas that we think are also really important to expand on top of this. But we are very aligned and supportive of what the bill already requires, which is human oversight and control. That's number one. Number two, fairness and accuracy. Number three, transparency, including consumer disclosures. Number four, data privacy and security. Number five, public and internal redress, including accountability and liability. And number six, the frequency of evaluations and documentation of improvements. Now, in our discussion with members and with other people, we have at least two areas we've identified that we think are important within this ethical discussion. The first is what we would call collaboration and sovereignty. So what we mean by that is we think it is appropriate to encourage state-level cooperation. So Texas is advancing this bill. We would expect to see similar bills in other states. And we think that is good, and they should materially align because the core of what this bill is advancing, I think, is very reasonable and an effective approach. And that's the way the United States works. Like, we shouldn't encourage having an unelected bureaucracy in DC dictating everything. We should have elected officials, particularly as it pertains to the public sector. And what we mean by sovereignty is we also shouldn't allow, as has tended to happen in a place like Europe, supranational or outside of government overview entities like the World Economic Forum, for instance, to start to create their own code of ethics and try to enforce that over the will of the voters, or create a sort of entity that appropriates the authority that should be vested in our elected officials. And so one of the dangers is that the most effective way for that agenda to be advanced is often to say, this is the ethical thing to do. We all have to agree on ethics. The fact of the matter is, and I think that this bill lays it out for continuous improvement and discussion, there is no singular, we're going to just declare what the code of ethics is, it doesn't change, and ours is the best, and everyone must submit to that. No. That's not something that we should agree to either tacitly or accidentally or through lack of opposition. And so we think it's appropriate within this code of ethics to discreetly say our public agencies should be following a code of ethics subject always to the approval of elected officials. We also highlight a need for broader public investment in education and engagement. And so that's not discreetly mentioned in the bill. We think it's a logical part of this broader discussion. If we create a code of ethics, we should invest in educating our citizenry around why we did that, why we think it's important. And that can be particularly helpful at the local government level, so cities and also school districts, which are obviously publicly funded. So we wanted to make sure to highlight that within the development of our code of ethics. And the other one that I want to highlight is a defense of free speech and innovation. And Pavan had already touched on that in some of his comments earlier, that often the discussion around ethics can quickly veer in a direction that doesn't recognize some of the bedrock principles of this country. And one of the very most important ones, I think, is free speech, right?
Free speech, exactly. Yeah. And I think when you were talking about property rights, there's been so many, that's one of the most fundamental tenets of our economic system is property rights. And we start looking at the broader implications of what you're proposing here, especially as we look at innovation, what we want to foster. Question, Steve, how many other states are doing something similar? Are we working in parallel with other states, or are we here in Texas the leaders in this at this point?
Texas is taking a leading position in terms of this kind of code of ethics approach
Okay.
to the state agencies and using that, I think, as a process to establish best practices more broadly.
Okay.
I think that's a Texas first. Now, the state of Nevada, I know, has done some good work
Yes, I thought so.
to roll out
I recall that.
some AI regulations with a sandbox program. So that sandbox concept
Right.
is not new to Texas. That has been developed, it's either Nevada or Utah. And so that has been kind
I
of
think it is Nevada.
brought over from that. So I think Texas is reaffirming that. And I think we should adopt that as a best practice broadly, whether at the state or federal level. When you create a program, have a separate sandbox program so that if someone always has an opportunity to say, hey, I want to invest in a particularly innovative application of AI, but I'm concerned about kind of regulatory suffocation, come in the sandbox program, and that innovation can continue to take place here in the United States because we don't want to push that offshore. And I'm not going to claim Texas was number one on that. The biggest kind of headlines around AI have been in the opposite direction. California and New York, unfortunately, have both advanced. And California had the bill I mentioned that the governor vetoed. That's being brought back again. So that's trying to make its way through the legislature again. And then New York has a similar bill around what's usually termed as AI safety. But again, it usually veers into a direction where, in the name of supposed ethics, you create a sort of centralized, suffocating government control that is just going to stifle innovation and, frankly, send it to other jurisdictions.
And it's specific to stifle innovation in those states, whereas Texas could actually flourish because of the sandbox. Texas or Nevada, or I believe it's Nevada.
It's a good point, David. If I were a little more, I don't know, if I weren't a proud American and wanted America to win broadly, I might say, you know what, let California do this. And then Texas will win and all those companies will move over here. And frankly, I have considered that myself as also a proud Texan, but I really don't want that. I want the United States broadly to win. We
may be Texas, but we're part of the bigger nation, and that's what we want.
Right. That's right. Amen. We're all working together here. And so hopefully our friends in California can learn from this kind of approach, which, let me highlight again, has passed with unanimous bipartisan support. So this doesn't need to be this kind of a partisan fight. I think we should all agree we want to win in the AI economy, but we cannot do that through centralized safety regimes that are rife with the danger of creating confusion and a lack of clarity around how to comply with something, which is the same as saying you can't do it. If you can't clearly articulate in a simple way how somebody can comply with something, that's the same thing as banning it. And that's what we've essentially seen in Europe. And so that's what I think this law is achieving. That's why we felt it was important to testify publicly in its support. And that's why we want to invite people, go to innovationconnect.ai. You can follow us, AI Innovation Association there. And for free, you can sign up to our email distribution for free. We're going to be giving highlights because we only have a few weeks left in the legislative session to get the bill to the governor's desk to become law.
Yeah, for the state of Texas. And we're wanting to champion SB 1964.
Senate Bill SB 1964. That's right. Yes, sir.
Good. We need to get behind that and make sure we get that.
If I could add something, David.
Yes, sir.
I think the really important part of AI Innovation Association and our code of ethics and what we're trying to push here in this bill is this concept of sovereignty. And Steve touched upon it a little bit. And I like to talk about that as an immigrant, and I'm a naturalized citizen, so I swore an oath to the Constitution. And because of that, I understand something really important as to why America is the greatest country on the planet. It's really simple, is that our Constitution is rooted on the concept that the rights that we have are not given to us by the government, but by God.
By animal rights.
That is fundamental of the American system. So if we yield our sovereignty to these supranational organizations and these weird international treaties or something like the EU, everywhere else in the world, every single other country in the world believes the rights that you have as a citizen comes from the government.
That's what's so wonderful about our Constitution. We know that it comes from God.
Exactly. So we should never, as Americans, yield to a supranational organization, because that means you're basically saying these rights are not self-evident. These rights are not mine.
Right.
Rights are being granted to me. That you're automatically enslaving yourself to that organization, to those group of people. So sovereignty is fundamental. If we cannot yield our existence, our technology to a third party.
That's really a good point, Pavan, and I think it's so important. I want to learn a little bit more about the Innovation Association. If you could get a little more for people to get involved, become more aware of that, how can they do?
The best way to do that is our website, which is innovationconnect.ai. We're going to be making more announcements there about the advancement of this legislation. We will be promoting publicly very soon an event that we'll be hosting in Washington, D.C.
Yes, very excited
July.
about that one. Can't wait to be there for that.
It's going to be a great event, and it'll build really on this discussion that we're having here of here are some good ideas from Texas, and let's take those to the next level and make those standard for the country at large to be a pro-innovation economy. So that's going to be a really exciting way for people to get involved. And then we are also going to publish this code of ethics as a working draft. And so we're inviting people to come in as an industry association. We're a nonprofit. We don't compete with you as a business. We're a network for you to benefit from. And we think that companies and individuals that are involved in the AI economy will benefit from, be a part of the working draft process of that code of ethics and the continuous engagement that's going to come from that. We don't think that's something that we pass this law and then it's just done. That's not what the law is even saying. It's let's establish a core framework of kind of the bedrock principles and then have continuous evaluation and improvement along the way. And we want to be the leading association that facilitates that for the business community. So again, go to innovationconnect.ai and just get involved with us because we all benefit as we grow this network.
I want to stress in that you're wanting to do that across the United States, not just the state of Texas. While we're focused in on Senate Bill 1964 right now, this association is a national association, and you're inviting him. I'm on the website right now. I'm looking at the founders. Pavan, not surprising you're again at the forefront of this, along with Lee Bratcher and, of course, you, Steve. So you're the three founders of this. A little bit of Lee's background. Again, he's Texas Blockchain Council, and explain how that fits in succinctly here again.
Yeah, so I had worked with Lee at the Texas Blockchain Council, and we met Pavan at a summit that the council was hosting. And I would give kind of two core reasons of why I think that's a differentiator for us in a positive way. First, we have the momentum of coming out of an association that's done this before, that has a core membership group. So we weren't just starting from nothing.
Correct, yeah.
Say it simply. So that's number one. And the second is the track record of kind of what's the philosophical underpinnings of the advocacy that we do. And I would describe that most simply as innovation and decentralization. A lot of chambers of commerce or associations that are out there often tend to skew towards the interests of the largest companies because those are the companies that are on their boards or give the most money. And so from a first principles starting
But that's
point,
not always where, and I'm going to stress the point of what you're saying, interrupt you, Steve, but I apologize. That's not where we're finding groundbreaking innovation in some of those larger companies. They have a tendency, no disrespect to Microsoft, but it hasn't been Microsoft that's brought a lot of the innovation to our nation. They were there and instrumental at the beginning, but it's a lot of the upstarts that have come that Microsoft has bought.
That's right. And so to get to the point, really, if someone says, what makes you different? There's so many AI groups and happy hours and whatever else. We are really focused on that philosophical underpinning that we are for the entrepreneur, the innovator, the disruptor, private property rights, and open source collaboration. And if you choose to only use ChatGPT, that's your choice. It's a free economy. But we think that an innovative landscape will deliver better results for everybody.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're doing this, is the community needs a place where that viewpoint is articulated and defended. And we think that it's underserved in traditional associations.
Very interesting. If you look at where you anticipate this going, give us a little insights into what we have in the next 12 to 14 months with this association.
Yeah, thankfully, just this last week, that was made much more clear because the current chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee at the federal level is Senator Ted Cruz from Texas.
Yeah.
And they held a committee meeting with all of the major CEOs from AI companies. And Senator Cruz stated very clearly there that he intends to advance an AI-focused piece of legislation that, to quote him, will be a light touch regulatory regime. And he really gave a speech. The senator would have appreciated what Pavan said at the top of the call around the failures of Europe and these onerous regulatory regimes, because that's exactly what Senator Cruz was preaching. And so I'm thrilled to hear it, because that's our big focus, is let's take lessons from a place like Texas, but let's rally together as one United States of America and say we are here to be the AI economy of the future, the most innovative, and the place where, the best and brightest want to build AI companies. And that's the kind of vision that the senator cast there. You're going to hear that a lot at our event on July 8th in Washington, D.C.
I want to get there in just a minute. Yeah.
That's going to be a big theme for that, and the moment is ripe for it. And that is our big focus in the next 12 to 18 months, is to try to remove a lot of this uncertainty that we've had for years of what kind of law is going to pass, what kind of regime is going to be implemented. And the sooner that we can do that and give innovators clarity that the United States is the jurisdiction for choice for AI innovation and technology, the better off we're all going to be. So as an association, we're very focused on that. And I think we're going to be one of, if not the most effective voices in that.
That is very exciting. Yeah. Proud of the fact that it's starting and showing up here in Texas. So the code of ethics that you guys established, did that have any political input, or was that pretty much come out of the industry? Pavan, I'll start with you.
Mostly me, Steve, and Lee brainstorming together and putting our thoughts down.
Outstanding. Yeah. Very important.
We started from that first principles of what's important to us, so that as we build this network, we think it's important to tell people up front, these are our values. So if you want to come in and work with us, we would love to build that network, but it can't just be an association that does the will of the highest bidder. We're not interested in building that. Yep. And so that was where we started from. And then as we saw Senate Bill 1964 come out and pick up steam, we realized there's a tremendous amount of alignment there. Yeah. And we can work collaboratively through that process to be an effective stakeholder there. And so that's how we got involved more in the political process from that standpoint. And so now we're working towards getting that bill passed. I do think it will pass. We have a couple of weeks before the session ends. And then on the heels of that, we'll be publishing much more broadly our own kind of thoughts and version of that broader code of ethics, so that we can start to build more broad feedback from that. And that'll continue to evolve over time. But the core principles that are going to be laid out very clearly there, those don't evolve. Because like Pavan said, some things are really foundational to what you're doing as an organization.
Yeah, you cover a lot of this on the website. It's really good. I'm looking through the website right now. I encourage everyone to get over to the, again, listeners, we'll put a link in it, but it's innovationconnect.ai. Very exciting. Is this got pretty, would you say, bipartisan support? I mean, Senator Cruz can be a lightning rod, which can drive some of the left over to further over their other side of their aisle. Or are you finding that even though he's been, I don't know if it's championing this or he's leading the committee, right? Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
Is it getting good bipartisan support? Is he getting good support?
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example. So Senator Cruz actually is on the heels of passing into law his Take It Down Act, which was an act that was co-sponsored by a Democratic Senator, Klobuchar, and had broad bipartisan support, that was focused on the removal of deep fake and non-consensual images, particularly of minors, on social media that were being generated by AI, which is just a horrific, vile evil. Vile. And so that's an example, I think, of some of the leadership that we're seeing in the Senate. The unfortunate reality is that before the last election, the United States was going down, frankly, a pretty dystopian path of really emulating Europe more than anything else. I think that Senator Cruz is leading sort of a vibe shift, if I can describe it that way. But here in Texas, Senate Bill 1964 has passed unanimously out of the Senate. Our desire as an association is to make this kind of pro-innovation agenda open to everyone. And we want to have as many people contributing to that economy as possible. But the reality is, at least in recent months, the Republican Party has been more focused on advancing that pro-innovation agenda. And so I'm not going to deny that reality. But what I do think we're going to see in the next couple of months, as I think momentum will build around what Senator Cruz was laying out in terms of his vision for a light touch regulatory regime, is I think it will become more and more politically unfeasible to stand for this kind of draconian AI regulation. And that's what we even saw from Gavin Newsom in California. So I hope that it continues to be more bipartisan. A lot of the speakers at our event in July may be more aligned with Senator Cruz because they've been most vocal in standing up for innovation, for free speech and open source. But we are very much committed to bipartisanship and to expanding this coalition.
It's very exciting. Let's talk about, I want to go one more thing. For someone that there's currently one chapter in Dallas, is that correct at this point?
Yeah, so I'm based here in Dallas with Lee.
If they want to start more chapters, people want to get chapters of the various other parts of the United States. How do they do?
Yeah, so you can sign up through our website and reach out. We've had a few people do that live in different parts of the country and are interested in opening a chapter. And we're finally ready, I think, to really ramp up that kind of outreach as we solidify this code of ethics and so very clear, articulated, this is what we're doing as an association, and here's why you come to our events and establish a chapter. Right. And that's why we've been putting so much effort into developing this over the past couple of months. So we have opened up Dallas just because I live here and Lee lives here and Pavan finds himself here pretty frequently because of his business endeavors. And we have an office here with a space to do that kind of thing. And so we've been experimenting with that, but we want to be a nationwide movement, as you said before. So we do look forward to doing that. And we make it easy to sign up on the website there to get more news around that. And so that doesn't cost anything. And then as we build this over time, we'll have more kind of members only sort of exclusive offerings.
Yeah, go to the website under membership. You'll see a virtual for $20 a month, $50 individual, corporate $500. So it's very affordable. People need to get involved. Pavan, I just love the vision that you have for this and the fact that you have been instrumental in working with leaders like Lee, who is iconic leader. You've told me about him so much. And then kudos to you, Stephen, for getting involved in this. Very exciting.
It really is a privilege. And yeah, thank you, Pavan. He first had the vision for this, and it's only become more crucial in the past couple of months. AI is more and more in the headlines, and we couldn't have even known it was going to be that way when we started it. So Pavan planted this seed, and it's exciting to see it grow.
I do have some advice for our listeners.
Yeah.
And I know Americans, and there's a lot of talk about safety, and there's fear about AI. And if you really stop, but you have to, like with every risk management, every time there's fear and there's challenges, you have to look at it in perspective. Okay, so the risk of an American doing something evil with AI, let's call that a 1.
Yeah.
Okay. The risk of North Koreans doing something evil with AI and using it to infiltrate our utilities and our banking system, that's a 10.
That's a 10, yeah.
So the only way to fight, if we strangle our industries, if we strangle our innovation through we basically would be self-inflicted wounds.
Great way to put it.
If we out of our own fear strangle ourselves, okay, then guess what? We lose, right? And we'll be defenseless. We won't have the intellectual power. We won't have the technology in America to defend ourselves from the countries who don't wish us well. So we have to do what we've always done as a country to stay on top is to foster private enterprise, to foster innovation, and not too much, just the right amount of guardrails to make sure that the risk of 1 is kept contained.
Good.
And the best way to keep that risk level at a 1 is to keep AI decentralized and distributed across as many Americans as possible, because the famous adage is absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you concentrate control of AI within the hands of a few people, that will lead to massive corruption and all the fears that we were talking about, all the challenges, all the evil that AI could do. We will see that happen.
Let's talk about the conference that's coming up in Washington, D.C. This is a one-day event, and already you've got Scott Turner there. You've got some pretty impressive individuals. The HUD Secretary, Scott Turner.
Yes. Secretary Scott Turner and a number of really senior administration officials from the Trump administration. And this is an event in D.C. on, I think, July 8th. Please go to ussaic.com, and this is a strategic conference talking about basically all of these things. This is the lead sponsor of this is AI Innovation Association, and we want to connect deeply with the public. We want to connect deeply with our regulators and with the legislature to make sure America stays as a leading forefront.
Could you give us that website one more time, Pavan?
ussaic.com.
That's U.S. Strategy for AI and Crypto, ussaic.com.
Yeah, and that's important because this isn't just about artificial intelligence. This is about artificial intelligence and blockchain.
Very good.
Because those are the two really transformational technologies of this century.
Yes.
And the two actually work very nicely together. I'm going to put my 2-second plug about AngelAi. As you know,
of course.
Has a full AI and blockchain integration already in working commercially and delivering value. I think we're the first to actually fully pull it off, right? To show how AI and blockchain can work together to deliver value, economic uplift to Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Main Street.
Very good, man. It's very excited to see what's going to be going on. We want to stay in touch with you, both of you, on this. I think it's such a significant initiative. While it's just happening in Texas right now, it's going to have ripple effect across the nation. So even those that are not are fortunate enough to live here in Texas should get behind this and support this.
Absolutely, and thank you for just supporting, getting the word out there, and that's how we build this. It's a great time to be involved.
Yeah, it's really exciting. These are such exciting times. How can you not? And we're at the foundational aspects of what is going to happen. Something like what you're doing in Innovation Council is just so exciting. So I'm really excited about it. Appreciate you both being here.
Last thing,
yes.
David, you have an exclusive. I think you're the only podcast or pretty much any that has an exclusive on what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And what just happened last week is a milestone. It's a big milestone. Exclusive, the future.
I'm just honored.
David Lykken, the man.
Yeah. I'm just honored to be a part of having a voice and share the vision and share the developments of what's going on in these very exciting initiatives. We got to get involved, folks, because you either get involved or this thing could go a direction and it's going to hurt all of us. And when I say hurt, we're not going to be allowed to have the innovation that can come from this that can be so powerful and game changing for all of us. Stephen, Pavan, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate you both.
Cheers.